All right, here's another example from our note pack. This one is example C, also from page 10 that we were looking at. This one is a piecewise function. It gives us a graph that we're going to have with two separate rules that we're going to apply for this piecewise function. Now my favorite way to start these is to go with what our dividing line is. Now this one tells us that our division happens at -2. Pulling that from this rule because we're going to apply this first rule every time x is less than or equal to -2. We're going to apply the second rule every time x is greater than -2. So -2 is our dividing line. On your graph, let's go ahead and set up that division line at -2. So I'm just going to kind of do a nice dashed line. It just reminds me that one thing happens on one side of -2 and a different rule happens on the other side of -2. And both of these are x values, so I graph that on the x-axis. It crosses the x-axis, so it's an x value. Most students have great success when we set up a table. It goes back to everything you learned from Algebra 1, and it's just a nice clean way. If we know we're working with linear functions, and we are because everything is to the first power, so we're looking at everything that is going to be a straight line. So we just need some values that fit this first rule and some x values that fit this second rule. Now this first rule is everything less than or equal to -2. So I need some values that are less than or equal to -2. Let's see, some things that are less than -2 would be like -4, -3, and yes, it can equal -2. So I'm going to make sure that I have that included. And since that's my dividing line, I'm going to remind myself this is going to be plotted as a solid circle, a solid dot at -2, because this rule actually applies to it. So I'm going to apply this first rule. I'm going to do it in black. When I plug in -4 into this first rule, and I picture -4 plus 4, my output is 0. When I plug in a -3, -3 plus 4 is a +1. And when I plug in a -2, because remember my x can equal a -2, -2 plus 4 gets me a +2. So there's the first rule, up to the point that I hit that dividing line. I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to work the second rule that we have. Oh, how about shocking pink? So I need some values that fit my second rule. My second rule says it has to be greater than -2. So numbers that are greater than -2 would be like -1 and 0. Both of those are greater than -2. Now I need to think about how those plug in to our rule, the one that applies that we're going to use up here. So when I plug in -1 in place of x, now watch what I'm doing, be very careful. When I plug in -1, I have the opposite of -1. And you've seen me in class many times say a negative and a negative is enough to build a positive. So what we end up with is actually a +1. Now in place of x, I'm going to put in that 0. And -0, well, 0 is not negative or positive, so -0 is just 0. If I continued this table, just to show you a little extra point in case you're unconvinced of what this should look like. If I plug in 1, if I plug in 1 into the equation, I'm going to simply put it in place up here, and my output is a -1. -1. We can also think of this from our previous objective that we had, thinking of this if our original rule looked like it did. Negative x. What I have is a slope of -1, so I should see a downward line here. This is a negative slope going on here. All right. But I have some great points here. Let's go ahead and graph what these look like. I'm going to go back to the black marker so that I think about my first rules that I have. -4, 0. There's an ordered pair going on right there. -1, 2, 3, 4, 0. I have another point at -3, 1. So I move -3 and up 1. And then I have an actual point going on here, a solid point going on at -2, 2. So on that dividing line, up 2 units, a solid circle going on there. And then I can connect these dots going in an upward slope if I read it from left to right. But remember, this is everything to the left of x equals -2. All right, so now I need to graph our other points that we have here. See another ordered pair going on at -1 and 1. So I go -1, 1 right here. 0, 0. 1, -1. And so what I have is a line that's coming right out here. Now it just so happens these two lines tend to meet right here at this point, -2, 2. But I'm going to keep that solid dot there. We should have a graph that looks like this. I'm going to do one more of these examples for you. It'll be example D. So if you'd like to keep on watching, check the next video.